I'm Julia Pyper, host of the Political Climate Podcast. In my day job, I'm Vice President of Public Affairs for GoodLeap. We're a technology company delivering best-in-class financing and software for sustainable solutions. I also support GoodLeap's nonprofit partner, Give Power, which brings clean water and clean electricity to communities in need around the world. I can't resist the opportunity to give a little shout out to Give Power. It has now deployed 16 solar-powered desalination systems that provide safe drinking water for over 1.1 million people around the globe. And that organization will complete 3 more solar water farms, as we call them, before the end of this year. But that's enough for the wind-up. We're not here to talk about feel-good things like delivering electricity to people in need. We're here to talk about everyone's favorite topic, American politics. So, more specifically, we're talking about the politics and policies that shape American energy and climate action. Why? Because energy and climate intersect with virtually all aspects of life. And despite all the incredible technologies that exist to lower emissions and advance US energy competitiveness, history has proven that politics and policy shape how the industry evolves. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. We created the Political Climate Podcast back in 2018 to have honest conversations about these issues with perspectives from across the political spectrum. Today we're recording a live version of the show that I hope you all enjoy. Since this is being recorded for the Political Climate Podcast feed, can the crowd just give a little bit of a cheer to give some energy in the room?
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Without further ado, let me introduce my co-hosts. I'm joined by Brandon Hurlbut, who served as Chief of Staff at President Obama's Department of Energy and went on to found Boundary Stone Partners and Overture VC. Brandon, this is your hometown, Chicago, so what's it like to be back?
Can you hear me? Oh, good. Yes, it's great to be back. I went out to Wrigley Field yesterday. I traded in my healthy LA lifestyle for a burger, a hot dog, Bud Light. I went to Sluggers. I hit some balls. It was great.
Good, back in the hometown. Well, we're also joined by Neil Chatterjee, who served as an energy advisor to Senator Mitch McConnell and as chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission under President Trump's first term. He's now Chief Government Affairs Officer at Palmetto, a clean tech developer. Hey, Neil, I saw you were also at the baseball game, I think, yesterday, and you ran into Secretary Ernest Moniz, former Secretary of Energy, upon your arrival here. So any goss you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, he's great. Look, he and I developed a great relationship when he was Secretary of Energy and I was working for Leader McConnell. A lot of Kentucky interest in uranium enrichment at the time. And then we've kept in touch since. He would be a great guest on this podcast because I think his views on energy policy are squarely in line with what we often discuss here. He's also very proficient when it comes to baseball. He's a Red Sox fan. Was happy with the big win yesterday.
Cubs took the series.
I'm looking out for my guy Walker Buehler. He pitches tonight in Philadelphia. We need a big performance out of him heading into the trade deadline.
This is not a sports podcast.
I know. Sports.
Politics. Great. Well, moving on, we're pleased to be joined today by Greg Bertelsen. He's CEO of the Climate Leadership Council, a nonprofit think tank founded by Republicans that's dedicated to championing the most effective, fair, and lasting climate solutions with a focus on market-based solutions. CLC partners with a high-profile coalition that includes corporations, environmental nonprofits, financial institutions, former policymakers, and Nobel laureates. Greg previously served as Senior Director of Energy and Resources Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers, where he led advocacy efforts on behalf of manufacturers for a variety of different energy and environmental issues. Greg, thanks for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I also am a baseball fan.
Okay.
That game that you two went to yesterday was a 2:30 game. 2:25 p.m. I get a text from Sir Neil Chatterjee. That's how he asked me to put in my phone.
To be addressed.
He said, Craig, my name is Greg. I've got an extra ticket to the Cubs game if you want to join. Signed, Neil Big Papa Chatterjee. I'm sorry I couldn't make it on 5 minutes notice, but I heard it was a great game.
Did you also have some burgers and beers, Neil?
And the game started at 1:20.
Central time.
Okay, let's get things started for real. So this feels like a watershed moment. The energy transition has been underway for decades, but here in the US, that's been supported in part by stable tax policy, at least 20 years or so of tax policy aimed at diversifying and securing the US energy system. Total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions declined nearly 20% over the past 20 years, with the greatest gains in the electricity sector, where coal use has dropped dramatically, while natural gas and renewables have gained rapid adoption. Now it feels like we're entering this new era. We're hearing more calls, not just from one party, but really across the political aisle, for a new era of American energy focused on U.S. competitiveness. But what does that look like? Here's where I think we start to see some divergence. There is a vision to onshore manufacturing, make more U.S. products. At the same time, both political parties have agreed that they want to, compete against China. The war on China is in full speed right now. And yet we can't ignore the demands for resilient, clean, and affordable energy solutions. But again, what that looks like is where I think things start to fall apart. So, Greg, tell us a little bit how you think about this next inning, if you will, of the clean energy transition. Wow. Look, my sports reference, hey, yo. I can roll. We had the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed that, if, depending on your perspective, helps achieve some of these goals or really sets them back. We've had executive orders that follow. What do we do now? Where are we in this ecosystem and this evolution?
Yeah, we really are in a new inning, a new chapter. I mean, let's just take a look back the last 20, 25 years, because there are these chapters or innings that we tend to go through, and with them, there tend to be big changes, big political swings in terms of how the U.S. is addressing climate policy. So you go back to like the late 2000s, and you can go earlier in this, but let's start late 2000s, early 2010s. You had MASS v. EPA, you had the endangerment finding, authority for EPA to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Brandon comes to power. We start talking a lot more about cap and trade. Mid-2010s, that's when the regulatory approaches really started kind of hitting the road. Think like Clean Power Plan to regulate greenhouse gases from power plants. You had Paris, 2015. You had the extension of the wind and solar tax credits as part of the deal for crude exports. Then late 2010s, pendulum swings back. Regulations get pulled back. We come out of Paris. Early 2020s, we're back in Paris. Regulations are back on the books. And then, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act passes, biggest climate bill in U.S. history, several $100 billion in tax credits. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Tax credits come back largely. We're out of the regulatory game. In fact, we're kind of going after the roots of regulations this administration. And so, again, great question, which is like, what's next? And that's, I think, a reason a lot of us are here this week. I think that's a focus for many of us, is like, what's next for U.S. climate policy? And my view is that this next inning should be focused on an unapologetic focus on advancing U.S. competitiveness. And I mean this beyond just clean energy technologies. I mean this for industries like steel and aluminum and cement. And there are three reasons from a climate perspective why I think this should be our focus. First, U.S. industry, by and large, is more carbon efficient than the rest of the world. So our steel industry, for example, is anywhere from like 30 to 90% more carbon efficient than many of our competitors. So every time a U.S. steel product is used at the expense of a higher emitting product, that lowers emissions. Second, and perhaps most importantly, this is still the most innovative economy in the world, and you want that force competing for the next generation of energy technologies. If we are not at the table, if we're not trying to capture the $230 trillion market for decarbonization, not only is our economy missing out, but the climate's not going to benefit from those innovative forces. And then finally, and this is a political reason, is we need to get Americans more bought into this cause. And the way we buy Americans in is we give them a stake in it. They need a real equity in this new future. And that starts with an unapologetic approach towards advancing U.S. competitiveness.
Brandon, from the Democrat perspective, do you agree with that? Is that enough of the story, or does it hide some of the efforts we need to take to decarbonize faster? What's your view?
I 100% agree with focusing on U.S. competitiveness. I think the moment that we're in right now, here's what we know. We know that demand is up. We know that we have supply chain shortages, gas turbines, transformers, and we know that costs are up. So far this year, utilities have asked for $29 billion in rate increases. electricity bills are up 2x over the rate of inflation, and it's now about the same amount of someone's budget as like gasoline. And we all know the politics around gasoline prices. When gasoline prices go up, DC goes crazy. And I think you're going to start seeing that with electricity. And I think the politics are going to call for dealing with affordability. And right now, the utilities have no incentive due to their business model to reduce a customer's bill. So I think, I'm old enough with these gray hairs. I mean, people were talking about reforming the utility business model 15 years ago. But we're in this era, I think, people are going to have to get serious about it. They're going to have to figure out on affordability how we can get more efficiency out of the grid, how we can use grid enhancing technologies, how we can do demand response and load flexibility. The good news is, haven't been happy with a lot of the stuff coming out of DC lately, but in this appropriations bill that passed last week, there was a section that asked the DOE to work with FERC, local PUCs, and others to do a briefing in 180 days on options for demand response and load flexibility.
All right, like the silver lining there. I want to get into appropriations in just a moment, but Neil, any initial thoughts here on what this age of U.S. competitiveness looks like? Again, I think the devil's in the details here on which industry, what does it look like, and then how do we continue to decarbonize along the way?
Yeah, look, I really appreciated both Greg and Brandon's initial comments. I liked Greg's sort of historical framing and looking back at how we got to this chapter. The one thing I will note, if you look at Greg's iteration of the flow of how the policy shifts went, there was a period in time, kind of pre-Obama administration, where climate change and decarbonization wasn't political. People seem to forget John McCain was the Republican nominee for president in 2008. He was the principal author of a cap and trade bill to reduce emissions. Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee for president in 2012, and towards the end of his tenure in the U.S. Senate was openly calling for a price on carbon. So there was a time
Nancy
when
Pelosi and
Republicans
Newt Gingrich sat on a couch and did an ad together
on decarbonization.
Yeah.
There was a point in time when these issues weren't politicized. They got politicized, kind of in the 2010s during the Obama administration, and then obviously President Trump threw jet fuel onto these divisions, and we've sort of arrived at this place today where if you're for clean energy solutions and climate, you're perceived to be of the political left, and if you're for fossil fuels, you're perceived to be of the political right. And I've been pretty public. I think that is an outdated, antiquated way to view the world. And I actually think Greg hit on something that is going to snap us out of this, and that is American competitiveness, not just in manufacturing, but in AI. Like, we have to win the AI race for national security purposes, and energy is fundamental to winning that AI race. And I think that's where the optimism and the opportunity comes. I think for the political left, there has to be a recognition that we can't win the AI race and keep electricity both affordable and reliable, making sure that when Americans hit the switch, that the lights come on. But for the political right, to Brandon's point, I think we've got to look beyond fossil fuels and not just look to renewable technologies like solar and storage or a heavy emphasis on nuclear, but also look at megawatts, things like demand response and virtual power plants and DERs. And so right now, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed. I would have thought, because President Trump made these significant promises to the American people to both win the AI race for security purposes and bring down the cost of electricity, I would have thought by now the administration would have embraced an all of the above approach to energy. That 6 months in, that hasn't been the case. It's been very heavy fossil fuels, very heavy drill baby drill, almost a negative
Chris
shade
Wright's saying
thrown
mine
towards,
baby mine now.
I mean,
they tweeted something out with him in a coal mine yesterday.
I think as we get serious about the AI race, and the moment that a big data center to underpin AI that was scheduled to be built in the US goes overseas or goes to Alberta, That's the moment I think policymakers will wake up and realize we've got to be more sensible and balanced in our energy policy.
Well, several threads there I want to pick back up, but let's continue with this competitiveness theme for a minute. Greg, put some more meat on the bones here. Like, what does it look like to you to have the U.S. compete more, and be in the lead really on some of these, not only energy, but associated industries you mentioned like steel? Like, what are the pillars of succeeding on that?
Yeah, and by the way, we keep agreeing with each other, but I completely agree with
I was
Neil.
hoping for some more debate here. Get it spicier.
We do have to win on the AI race, but we also have to win just on the energy race, period. And like from a U.S. competitive standpoint, like we're doing pretty good just from a competitive standpoint. I realize I'm talking at a climate conference, but like on traditional fuels, we're doing pretty good competing, if that's your only metric. The problem is all of the growth, like the entire growth market globally, is in advanced energy technologies, in clean energy technologies. And we are doing bad on that. Like we're losing, and we're losing badly. And so we need to get in that game. And what that looks like to me is like a full court press. Now we're playing basketball instead of baseball. But like we need to like plus up our R&D, or research and development. Tax policy plays a big role. And we need to have tax credits for strategic industries, of which advanced energy I would include in that. We got to figure out permitting. I'm sure that's something that's been talked a lot already about this week, but we have to be able to build things. We need a regulatory environment to build things in this country. Supply chains, critical minerals, we haven't talked about that at all, but to build these things, there are a lot of components, and many of them aren't produced in many parts of the world. This is a stat that I'm sure many of you have heard, but China owns 85% of the critical mineral processing capabilities. We have to figure out a way to diversify our supply of critical minerals. Trade policy plays a role. We're not playing on a level playing field for U.S. manufacturers. We are playing against state-owned enterprises who are subsidized, who are stealing IP, who are flooding the market to crush their competitors. And in those instances, we should have things like tariffs. Now, I personally am a big fan of a carbon tariff or a border carbon adjustment, because it's an area where I know we have an advantage. And it also would be a powerful mechanism to encourage anyone who wants to access this market to lower their emissions. And then finally, we need to up our game in the international investment space. So we've got a few tools and agencies like the Development Finance Corporation, the Exim Bank, that help us access markets, but they are tiny compared to our competitors. China financed 15 times more energy projects than the US since 2013, 15 times more. And it's not just China. Comparing the Exim Bank to countries like Italy, Germany, Korea, France, the UK, their equivalent banks are all bigger than the US. You want to know who our peer is? Belgium. I mean, I love Belgium. I do. I love Belgium. But they're the size of my home state, Maryland. Like, we have to up our game in all of those areas. So it's easy.
Yeah, like more stats to layer on. There was first of all, there's a great op-ed by Paul Waldman in MSNBC opinion columnist. He said, China's leaders may not be happy about tariffs, but they couldn't be more pleased with the way President Trump is turning America away from the energy of the future. And I think that's a real thing that both parties are going to have to grapple with now, is if we're agreed we want to compete against China, can we sit on this race? Can we sit out this race on the clean tech portion? Because people point often to China's coal plants, and it feels like we can't get out of this dichotomy. Well, China built coal, so we can't build renewables, which seems to be sort of missing the point of the fact that they also generate more wind power than any other country on Earth. And by the end of 2024, China had installed 5 times as much solar capacity as the United States, and 3/4 of all solar projects under construction around the world are in China. Brandon, I know you have views on this, how the U.S. competes with China. Anything else you'd want to add here?
No, I mean, just to pile on, I mean, the numbers are staggering. Right now, the Chinese manufacturing capacity of solar and batteries each year is equivalent to the current U.S. nuclear fleet. Soon, their manufacturing capacity of solar and batteries will be the equivalent of the entire U.S. grid. That's how bad they're beating us. And I think we need to get really serious about this industrial policy. There's been some good first steps with what happened recently on this MP materials deal. Greg was talking about critical minerals, and what happened there is the Department of Defense took a really aggressive approach. They invested in this company $400 million. They have a mine to extract rare earth minerals, and they want to build out a manufacturing facility that has magnets that use these rare earth elements. Those magnets are used not only in EVs and wind turbines, but also military equipment, also like MRIs, health equipment. And so they lent them with cheap debt, $150 million for this manufacturing facility, and they're a customer to buy these magnets for the military. So that's the type of stuff that like China's been doing for the last 15, 20 years that I think we need to start doing on all these advanced energy technologies.
I'm going to call my buddy Kash Patel and put Brandon on a list, because I think this is like the second consecutive time you've used one of these podcasts to do a commercial for the Chinese Communist
Here
Party.
comes the spice.
Commercial for the Chinese Communist Party. Oh dear.
Listen, a lot of this is propaganda. I'm not sure I even believe half of what's coming out of China, but I think Greg raises a relevant point when he talks about a border carbon adjustment mechanism, when he talks about tariffs. Let's be clear, while the Trump administration may not ever use the words climate in advancing these policies, the administration's trade agenda is very much a climate agenda. Climate will be the beneficiary of some of these trade policies. Julia, you pointed out how much coal that China is building. If U.S. trade policy inhibits the ability of Chinese manufacturers to utilize these heavy emitting sources of generation to drive their manufacturing growth, that has a positive benefit for the climate and for the planet. So unlike Brandon, I am not bought hook, line, and sinker on the Chinese Communist Party's business model. I think we do pretty well here, and I think we stand to do well by being tough on trade, to be totally honest.
Well, let me go to a related topic. I do want to talk about appropriations. This is now the latest, work stream in DC. So, all the various things the government will fund, and right now the House Republicans have an energy and water appropriations bill. Some of the things it includes is slashing the Department of Energy's energy efficiency and renewable energy programs by 47%, the EERE office. It revokes over $5 billion of the bipartisan infrastructure law's resources from the DOE's programs to support hydrogen, direct air capture, carbon dioxide transportation and infrastructure, battery recycling, and energy improvements in public schools. It also seeks to eliminate the funding for the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations. I mention those because I think some of those would be considered tools in the toolkit the government can use to put the U.S. in this competitive position, right? Like public sector can't do everything, but it certainly can do some things. It can deploy projects, get over the valley of death. It can invest in R&D, as Greg alluded to earlier. So Neil, to you, to continue on here, what are things like pushing to defund the government agencies in that way do? And I guess we should also ask, how realistic do you think these defunding, this defunding will become? This still has to go through the washing machine in DC.
Yeah, I think based on the points that you just articulated, it's not likely to pass. I think it's more of a messaging bill to date. Look, Republicans have been pretty open. The president campaigned on the idea that we need to slash federal spending. And with the rescissions package that was enacted last week, with some of the cuts from DOGE and the like, Republicans are pursuing this. To date, and we're sitting here 6 months into the second Trump administration, they've been able to achieve all of this with either executive orders unilaterally via the White House or vis-a-vis reconciliation, the One Big Beautiful Bill, which was done with only Republican votes. They did a smart thing in that Republicans took a key leverage point away from Democrats by including the debt limit increase in the One Big Beautiful Bill. That was something, it was a bitter pill for a lot of fiscal hardliners to swallow, but they took it, and it took a leverage play away from Democrats, because typically debt limit increases are passed on a bipartisan basis. So the last sort of bit of leverage that Democrats have ahead of the midterm elections is going to be government spending. And I think that they're in a pretty strong position. And if Republicans moving through the appropriations process put out these bills with drastic cuts to programs, they will not be able to get 60 votes in the Senate to pass these bills. And then we get into a bit of a stare down over a government shutdown. And I gotta tell you, the party in power always loses politically when the government shuts down. It happens every single time. And I think that Democrats understand that they have this leverage. I don't think they're gonna bail Republicans out. I think they're gonna force Republicans to come to the table and utilize what leverage they have to get sort of a reasonable spending package put forward. I suspect it'll be a CR of some length, with a date change. But I think this is the one area where Democrats have leverage. It may be for a few weeks, a month, maybe more. The Trump administration may be willing to push the envelope and shut down the government. But I think we've seen historically the party in power that shuts down the government always loses. I refer back to my former boss, Senator McConnell. He used to always say, when he thought of government shutdowns, he pointed to the example of the shutdown that occurred during the Clinton era. And he said, Neil, the president had an inappropriate relationship with an intern and lied about it, and we still lost seats. That's how bad a government shutdown is. Politically, it's a loser, and I think the Democrats will leverage that in this process.
Interesting. Okay, let's go back to the big, beautiful bill for a moment. One of the things it did do is give some great stability on the tax credit front to industries like hydropower, geothermal, battery storage, nuclear, even biogas. They have tax credits that exist under the tech neutral tax credit bucket well into the early 2030s, 2033, and then phasing down from there. So as you think, Greg, about the manufacturing opportunities we have, the competitiveness opportunities, do you feel like there is enough certainty out there from the OBBB and I guess other related policies to give the industry the stability they need? Do the investors have what they need to push into these new areas? Renewables now did take a hit. There is some pathway to have some runway to those tax credits. You have 12 months to begin construction and get some runway there, potentially 4 years with safe harbor. But otherwise, projects have to be placed in service for wind and solar by the end of 2027. So that's creating some choppiness in the solar and wind markets, to be sure. But what do you think about the policy landscape we have now? Is there enough stability to realize the vision you're kind of laying out?
I hope so for the sectors that fared okay. But if I'm a investor and the viability of my project depends on U.S. policy stability, I'm discounting. I'm at least discounting. And I think that's the problem. That's the problem, is that we can come up with policies to support industries that we need to support. We can come up with incentives that make a difference, but they only make a difference to the extent that investors believe that they are going to last for the amount of time to get the project built or for the duration of the project. It seems like there's some solid bipartisan support around the technologies that you just laid out, nuclear and hydro, CCS, carbon capture and sequestration. I think to some extent, battery manufacturing.
We're seeing the Loan Programs Office stay active to pivot to some of those technologies, reliable technologies, under the Trump administration's view. So they didn't gut everything, is I think important to not miss.
That's right. That's right.
Is there a but coming?
Well, no. We just have to figure out a way. Like, we're always going to have pendulums swinging back and forth when parties take power. But we've got to figure out a way to shorten the length of the swing. And again, not to come back to the theme of my remarks, but it starts with something that I think the majority of both parties can get behind, which is advancing American competitiveness. If that's our lead blocker and we can bring climate policy behind it, I think the likelihood of policies staying in place for the longer term, the likelihood of advancing policies that can stay in place for the longer term increases.
Julia, you brought up a really interesting point earlier today when we speak about the pendulum swinging back and forth, you said that, and I think you may have been quoting a colleague of ours, that the pendulum swings back and forth, but the epicenter of the hinge of the pendulum has moved.
Yeah, and keeps moving. It's like 3D chess. So this was an Amy Harder of Cypher News, which unfortunately just wound down, but I'm sure Amy will go on to do great things. She had in her final column this discussion of the pendulum, which we get, swings back and forth, but that almost seems predictable. We got again, this 4D kind of chess happening where the pendulum itself is moving from a different point at any given time. And so how do you do long-term planning for things like energy that require long-term planning, and certainly climate, which evolves over years and decades, when there's that much change? And Brandon, you are an investor. I mean, I'm curious what you're hearing from the investment world on how to manage through this moment. I mean, there's also opportunity that comes with people who are willing to take risks in these moments, but doesn't mean there isn't pain. And I do look to the fact that there was a June report from E2, so this is before the OBBB even passed. $15 billion of new factories and various electricity projects were canceled from the beginning of the year. It's expected over 80 billion could be canceled amid this policy and market uncertainty. So there is a real world impact here, but what are you seeing?
A couple things. First, I love my friend Neil here, but two things that he does, like all Republicans, is when he hears something he doesn't like, he just calls it fake news. And two, I feel like, Republicans need to be modernize what's happening in the energy system. I mean, China is making batteries at $60 a kilowatt hour. What that means is, we talked about some of the things that did well in OBBA, and Republicans love this idea of baseload power, firm power. Well, soon, with cheap solar and very cheap batteries, you're going to be able to get really firm power with that. And if you're, not in the U.S., you likely have to import your energy on oil and gas. Most countries are not blessed with those natural resources. So you have a few countries that have this and they export it. And as we're fracturing, countries want to control their own supply chain. And so if China can drop in these factories into a country and produce these batteries for EVs and batteries to firm up power with solar, with cheap solar, they're going to do that and reduce their risk on oil and gas countries. So I think, in history, these industrial hegemons always win out, even over financial hegemons. So this is something that we have to be very, very serious about. So the reason I keep talking about this is I'm trying to sound the alarm. This is we're at almost a crisis here, and we need to get serious about it. And so from an investor standpoint, there is some pretty good news. For the first half of this year, or globally, the IEA is projecting $2.2 trillion of investment into clean tech. And oil and gas is $1.1 trillion. So that's double. In the US, we're seeing in the first half of this year, investment in clean tech is up about 12% over last year. Now that includes debt financing, which is up this year. VC is a little choppy. That's been down the last 2 years. I am a VC investor, and what we see is, number one, interest rates really impact a lot of early stage investing. Two, we need more exits. When your companies go public, we need to make money for investors. That will help. And then, three, some of this policy risk is real. So, energy is it's a capital intensive business, and it takes a while to get some of these returns. And so that, we need to know, is the U.S. government all in on this or not? So, so there is some mixed news from the investment community.
Do you think rate cuts will lead to more exits?
I think the IPO market generally has been frozen. It's not just a clean energy only issue. It's a VC issue across the entire financing class. And so hopefully, I've been surprised that with all of this, the OBBA and the impact it's going to have on the deficit, we have not seen the stock market suffer so far.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's trillions of dollars in spending, which I know there was a focus on, fiscal responsibility, but it still adds trillions and trillions of dollars, over 4.5, I think, to the U.S. budget, if you will. So it'll come at a significant cost. But as you say, the markets are not reacting negatively, and maybe that's because there's pro-growth that will come from it.
And I mean, you finance, DR. So interest rates really matter for your business.
For distributed energy, yeah.
Yeah, no question. And I think, again, the argument around the cost implications of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act are that ultimately growth will overwhelm, and that it will, the rising tide will lift all boats, and that it won't have the deficit impact that was projected, and the manner by which CBO scores these kinds of things is antiquated. So that remains to be seen. But yeah, to me, I'm watching interest rates, because I think, the rate environment is one that I think is the one last thing that is kind of holding down the U.S. economy. And we were speaking earlier, and you were kind of skeptical of the possibility for explosive growth in the U.S. I actually am of the mind that if we start to see gradual rate cuts out of the Fed, that we could see explosive growth in the U.S.
While watching for inflation, because that goes back to the consumer and making sure that they don't get hurt through this whole process. Greg, do you have a thought on this?
Just on the previous discussion, coming back to China for a second, one thing we haven't talked about is the importance of international partnerships. And so, why is it that we, in my opinion, shouldn't just sort of celebrate the fact that China can supply the world with cheap solar and cheap batteries, et cetera? And the reason is because, what's the stat? We're still 40% short on knowing what the technologies are that are going to help us get to a decarbonized global economy. And the problem with having an increasingly monopolistic player in the global economy is you lose innovation. If China has no competition because they have over-subsidized, because they have cut prices to kill their competition, and they're the only supplier in the market, we will lose the innovation we need to get to that next 40%. And the US can't stand up to China alone. We need to find common cause with our allies, with like-minded countries, to form international partnerships to say, hey, we are going to put up trade barriers. We are going to put up a carbon tariff or a border carbon adjustment, if you ask me, in the cases in which China is playing unfairly.
Greg, have you seen an example of once you lose the manufacturing edge, can you get it back?
It takes time. It takes time. I'd have to think about it, but in some cases, no. But the economy evolves and new industries, come online, and there are opportunities. This is a multi-decade race we are in. I hate to say it at this conference, and I hope I'm wrong. If I'm wrong about anything, I hope I'm most wrong about this. But we're several decades away from getting to where we need to get to from an emission reduction standpoint. And so from a competition standpoint, that means that we have several decades of competition and technologies that we have the opportunity to win on. This round, this inning, we're probably going to lose. We're probably losing right now. But we don't have to lose in the 2030s and the 2040s, but we do have to get focused. We have to get serious. We've got to avoid these massive pendulum swings in whichever direction they're going.
And I think you actually saw a lot of bipartisan support for foreign entity of concern restrictions. Great to onshore, but who onshores is relevant, where that IP comes from is relevant to truly win this race we're talking about. So I want to ask a question, Brandon, start with you. So if you're a climate activist in this world, what do you do with what we're talking about today? It's a very different framing from where I think we were even just a couple years ago. So, you advise a lot of, youth climate activist groups, among others. So what do you guide them on? Is the energy dominance agenda something you think the climate world can also get behind, or is it hunker down in your bunker and wait for a new day?
Well, first of all, I think some of these technologies did okay in the One Big Beautiful Bill, as we talked about. So it wasn't it was not great, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Number two, I think there's some humbling going on around the tactics and strategy from the climate movement, or at least I hope there is some reflection going on. Number one, I'm not sure we're seeing a mass movement around 2 degrees Celsius. There's not people demanding action on this at the polls. I think we find in the polling that some people care about climate, but even if they do, it's not the top issue for most people. It really is prices. They're thinking about what's happening right now. The idea of net zero by 2050 is not something that's really resonating with voters. And it's frustrating. I get it. The scientists have been calling for this for decades, and we're seeing it all happen. It's unfolding in real time for us. So the climate activists are right, but we, as my wife always says, do you want to get the outcome you want, or do you want to be right? And so we kind of start thinking more about outcomes. And I think that is around things like affordability. And this issue is going to be front and center in the policy-making process going forward for a couple of reasons. One, because of prices. Two, extreme weather. I mean, we're seeing this play out. Almost every month, there's a once-in-a-generation event. We are in LA, we experienced the wildfires, there was Texas, there was crazy tornadoes. I mean, everywhere you look, there's a 1 in 500 year event. So people are feeling this in their daily life. And then also insurance. This year, there's been $92 billion insurance payments or insurance costs that we've had to deal with due to these extreme weather events, which is 2x over the historical average. So we're paying for all of this right now. And now their insurance rates are going to go up, or insurance are going to exit the market. That's a day-to-day thing that people are going to have to deal with as well. So I still think the issue will be front and center, whether we call it climate or not.
Neil, let's ask this to you. Do you think renewables, efficiency, and EVs, I'm singling them out specifically, have an issue on branding? They were some of the buckets that got the worst tax treatment in the big, beautiful bill. Are they falling victim to culture wars? And to put some numbers around this, I looked at some Gallup polling. Favorability for renewable energy fell from a high of 73% in 2016 to 56% in 2025, while nuclear power, for instance, grew from 41% in 2016 to a recent high of 61% in 2025. So, interestingly, both decarbonization technologies, why are they on such different trajectories in the public view? There's been this total flip-flop. So what do you think is happening here?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely the result of politics and the result of culture. And, you look at nuclear power, and I'm a big proponent of nuclear power. I believe it's our single greatest form of carbon-free baseload generation. But the reality is it's expensive. And, to your previous question about, climate activism and where it goes from here, look, I'm a Republican from Kentucky who worked for Mitch McConnell and was appointed chairman of FERC by Donald Trump. I consider myself to be a climate activist. Like, I care deeply about the climate and about decarbonization. And I've spent the better part of the last decade going before conservative audiences, whether they be Wall Street investors, state legislators, congressional representatives, or conservative media, making the case for clean energy, not the climate case, but the business case. That as the business case for clean energy improves, then the politics out of this will start to dissipate to some degree. And so I do think, we're seeing a little bit of a branding dip currently when it comes to renewables, and I think it's around the notion of subsidies and politics and the Green New Deal, etc. I think it's a temporary blip. I do think that we are about to face an unprecedented surge in demand for energy in this country that is going to unfortunately drive prices up as well as challenge reliability. I think in that moment, that will be the opportunity for renewable resources to kind of demonstrate not just their reliability benefits, but also the pricing benefits and the cost benefits. And I think you'll start to see those numbers tick back up.
And I know we've talked about this before, but as someone who works in the clean energy space, I think it was also misunderstood as necessarily politically left, whereas runs the whole spectrum. We have folks who work all across the country, Florida, Texas, Utah, you name it, who themselves vote Republican. They consider themselves small business owners, hard hat wearing folks who were kind of shocked to find the political pendulum had swung so much, because from their perspective, this was just common sense. Everyone always renewed tax credits on a bipartisan basis. Started under President Bush, remember, back in 2005, for this diversification of the U.S. energy system. So I think we do have a bit of our own PR issue in that we got to represent ourselves as industry, probably a little more forwardly, and not just take it for granted anymore, that people know what the technology is and where it's most, where it has the biggest impact. Most of the investments from the Inflation Reduction Act were in red states, as we know. Surprisingly, it didn't have actually as much impact as I thought on the advocacy process. So I think folks still didn't even realize until late in the game just how many billions were even being deployed in their own states. We kind of failed on the storytelling front as an industry.
Yeah, it was a missed opportunity, I'll be honest. Like I've talked to a lot of Trump voters who, particularly when it comes to things like residential rooftop solar, they like the idea of going off the grid. They don't like their monopoly utility determining how much they have to pay every month for electricity. There's a huge opportunity here for clean energy to kind of intersect with MAGA if we tell the story right.
Greg, I want to talk a little bit about fossil fuels. Just to touch on this briefly, where does that fit into the U.S. competitiveness picture? Is it all of the above in your view, or is it kind of what you were saying earlier, that the next generation of tech, this new inning, the eighth one maybe, is a whole new era of maybe technologies we don't even know exist yet? So let the fossil fuels hum along, but put your efforts there. Or are you in the mindset that we got to win on all of it? Like, where do fossil fuels fit into this competitiveness picture?
From a climate standpoint, as a climate advocate, I'm of the strong belief that we need to stop talking about fossil fuels and spend more time talking about reducing emissions. And so, because to me, that's the objective. The objective is to zero out greenhouse gas emissions. And if that includes a big piece for carbon capture and sequestration or whatever, from my standpoint, that's perfectly fine. I also feel like this is an area where we lose a big chunk of American voters. We're not going to find common ground if the proposition to the American voter is this or that. The truth is that I think the market is largely going to tip in the favor and increasingly tip in the favor of cleaner, lower carbon, and we're seeing it across the globe, and Brandon highlighted some of the biggest reasons why. There are two big factors for why a developing country might choose a clean energy source. It's cost, and it's security. Mm-hmm. And if you can get energy for cheaper and not have to import it, even from a friendly country, you're going to choose that option. And that's why China has put so much money into renewable energy technologies. That's why the Saudis are putting tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars into renewable technologies. It is not because of climate. It's because they see that's where the market is heading. And if we don't notice that, if we don't recognize that, if we don't get ourselves out of this back and forth debate, we're going to miss that opportunity, and the world is going to miss the benefit of our innovators, which are going to ultimately be necessary to solve this problem.
Keeping with you, Greg, tell us a little bit more about the critical minerals piece and how that plays in. Brandon already mentioned the MP materials deal that the DoD did as this sort of great template. How else does the U.S. win on that component? And how does it work with maybe allies to get there? What does that vision look like?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. Let's be realistic about this. This is a huge challenge. The market is way distorted. There is a huge player in China, not to keep coming back to my favorite topic apparently, but we need to diversify our supply chains. And there's basically three components to it. First is we do need to unlock domestic resources. We need to do it in an environmentally sustainable way. And if we do, we will do it in the most sustainable way. But that is going to be wholly insufficient. Some of the products, some of the critical minerals we need just don't exist here, or they exist here and it's going to take us several decades to bring them online. And so in the meantime, and probably for the duration of our need for these products, for these materials, we need to form international partnership with countries that are friendly to our interest. And the final piece of this is we need to innovate. We got to figure out a way to need critical minerals less. So innovation plays a big role in critical mineral supply chain as well.
And do it the right way and make sure we've got the best human rights available, best environmental protections in place. The whole picture there I think is really relevant. I do think another flashpoint in this future going forward of U.S. competitiveness is traditional environmental views and how that aligns with the industrialization views we have, and making sure that the U.S. succeeds on all fronts. And as you said, though, in many ways it does inherently by just having a better product, better work standards, and things of that nature. Is that
unquestionably?
Yeah.
We have among the highest environmental, the highest labor, the highest human rights standards. On average, a product produced, a product mined, a product refined in the U.S. is going to be better net global for the environment than if it takes place in many other parts of the world. It's not to say that we don't need to be very thoughtful about the communities around those projects. These are not easy issues and easy topics. But yes, on balance, we are going to do it here cleaner.
All right. Final thought?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the reason China's owned this market is like they do like really toxic stuff. It's like Aaron Brockovich type situations going on over there. And we've invested in some like amazingly innovative companies like Alta, Endolith. They're using like synthetic biology to get more copper out of low-grade ore, or do refining and processing with proteins that can extract these rare earth minerals in a sustainable way. So we're seeing a lot of great stuff there.
I feel like we missed the opportunity for like a drinking game. For like every time we said China, like it really could have been much more lively if we had that going. Speaking of, we're gonna end with a little rapid fire questions, true, false. I want a little audience participation. We'll go to the audience first, we'll have the trues and the false, and then the panel will weigh in quickly. So here we go, just to close this out here. China accounts for over half of all electric vehicle sales globally. True or false? Audience? True, more trues, any false? True. It is indeed true. Actually, that was a layup. So yeah, you didn't even need your guys' input. Everyone knew it was true.
We're back to basketball.
Layup. I don't even know which one that's from. Which sport?
Soccer.
Soccer.
I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding.
I think it's basketball. All right. As of 2025, more than 10% of all new car sales in the U.S. are electric vehicles. True or false, audience?
False.
I'm hearing more falses. Panel?
Was it 10%?
As of 2025, more than 10% of all new car sales in the U.S. are
false.
EVs.
I think it's pretty darn
close.
close to
It's
that.
Well, this
close.
is, let's say, I'm benchmarking it through the end of 2024, so I don't have all 2025 numbers, obviously. So this is at the
I'll
end.
say true. I
I'll
think
say
it's pretty
true.
close.
Yeah.
I'm going to say false, even though I just joined the market of EV consumers last week.
There you go. It is, according to ChatGPT, I should caution, but it had sources. It is true. In 2024,
Boom.
EVs made up
Yeah, baby. Fake news over here.
over 9% in 2024. It crossed the 10% mark in early 2025. Okay, there we go. All right. U.S. fossil fuel production decreased during President Biden's term. True or false?
False.
False.
Layup.
Correct.
Layup.
Layup, but you know, it's
They
good
just
to
never said
reset
it.
the dialogue. They never said it right. More than 50% of new global electricity generation capacity added in 2024 came from solar power alone. More than 50% of new global electricity generation capacity last year came from solar alone. True or false?
I'm going true on that.
Also, we'll say true. Yeah.
True from the
True.
panel. That is true. More than 50% came from solar. All right, broader one for you guys. I'll go to the panel here. Coal will make a comeback in the U.S. True or false? Actually, audience, what do you think? Coal will make a comeback. Resounding falses. Any more color anyone want to add on this? Neil?
I'm the Kentucky guy, and I have to say, it's just not economically viable. Even in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, consumers there realize there's cheaper alternatives available. And so I have deep sympathy for the communities that are suffering due to the decline of coal, but I don't see a comeback for coal in this country.
Well, over 360 coal plants have shut down since 2010. Coal made up nearly half of U.S. electricity in 2008, a recent peak, and coal made up around 15% at the start of this year. Coal executives themselves have had very much the same message as you, Neil, that coal won't go back to its heyday. But we should note that in April, there was an executive order signed from President Trump that tasked the DOE with unilateral authority to obligate power plants to keep operating. Since then, the Department of Energy released a report talking about current power plant retirements and how that could trigger massive, widespread power outages by 2030. And since then, they already used that power to halt the closure of the J.H. Campbell coal plant in Michigan, despite an estimated cost that could be in the tens of millions to hundreds of millions. So maybe not a revitalization, but something for us all to think about is keeping existing plants online longer is definitely something I could see happening, and in fact, it already is. So that could be a little twist to people's expectations on that front. All right, final one here. Deep dish Chicago pizza is better than thin crust. True or false?
False.
Brandon, you're from Chicago. You said false? You like thin crust better? Is that like sacrilegious?
Tavern style. Yeah.
Tavern style. Is that
Yeah.
also a Chicago thing?
I think that's yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is going to be a test of whether or not you get to stay here or not.
No, I don't. That's how you separate the tourists from the originals.
I don't even know what tavern style is. Well, with that, we will close out our show. If I can find my closing notes, too many here. Sorry, Bruno, our editor, who will have to edit this part out.
Are we gonna take some questions?
We will take some questions. All right, we'll go right to questions, and then I'll do my last outro for the show. So if we could mind having a runner come around with some microphones. Let's have a little bit of dialogue here to close out. Okay, yes, one question.
Somebody please pick on Neil.
Easy to do.
Hi, thanks so much. I wanted to talk about the winning and the losing. How do if we're going to increase American competitiveness, and a lot of us are working in states and regions, and we want to get policies that are increasing competitiveness. How do we know when we're winning? How do we know when we're losing? What kind of indices or measures should we be looking at and telling stories around to sort of raise that opportunity cost that we know is potentially going to happen? Raise awareness about the opportunity cost.
That's a great question. I mean, I'll take a stab at it, and I think it's playing out a little bit in the reactions to the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There is sort of a broad narrative that it was devastating to the clean tech industry and to climate efforts writ large. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was not a great bill for the planet and for clean energy. But there were some components that I think innovative companies will be able to utilize and execute on smart strategies that they will come out of this stronger. And I think there's a real chance that certain clean tech sectors will actually be able to use the runway that was given to them by the bill. And I, for one, am very skeptical that the executive order the administration put out in the aftermath of passage will do much to deter that runway. I think with that runway in place, you're gonna see some companies and some consolidation who will emerge stronger, and you'll have a more investable sector. And so this is my long-winded senatorial way of saying, I think there are wins here for climate and for clean tech. We just have to be smart about how we go about taking advantage of the policy landscape as we see it.
Yeah, I've said this on a show before, but someone said to me once, sell the benefits, not the features, not just like, you want this because, and you kind of speak at people, but really show. When you talk about the nuclear power plant equivalent of what you're producing, or the tangible benefits in a different way, I found that the tone shifted. It wasn't like you should do this, and the shoulds, it shoulda, wouldas, but really getting back to brass tacks of why anyone would care about something. It's a slight shift in tone and tenor, but
I'd say quickly, emissions down, pollution down, according to what the scientists say, jobs up, costs down, and we're exporting these technologies to the rest of the world. That's what winning looks like.
Share of the global market. We're like 1/4 of China's clean energy exports, and the gap is growing, narrowing that gap.
I also feel like the storytelling got a lot better, at least on the OBBB framework, but it kind of came on too late. We needed to start like a year and a half earlier and anticipate Republicans.
If only somebody had said that.
If only someone said that. Did you say that probably on this podcast? All right, next question, please.
Hey guys, great to see you. Thanks for coming to Chicago. I think the stakes for the energy transition for the US are even higher, and I have a hypothesis, and I'm looking for Brandon and Neil to debunk it or substantiate it. So as the world starts its secular decline away from oil, if the petrodollar is a big reason we have exceptional privilege and the ability to run the money printing press in DC, can you start to see a world where in the next decade or two, this could, between doubling down on raising the deficits and pulling back from clean energy, could this be the end of US economic hegemony?
Ooh.
Wow.
You want to go first?
You got this. I didn't understand half the
That was
words
the
you said.
spice we needed a little earlier.
Yeah, we had explained to Neil what Overton window meant a couple weeks ago. So like you
Hegemon.
gotta
Oh my God.
speak like a fourth grader, with
I
Neil.
went to a state school.
Me too. University of Illinois.
Recycling the cash back into the US Treasury and buying our debt, and you start to see interest rates go up because that oil revenue is not there, does it really start to hurt the United States' ability to borrow money in the future?
Yes, this is when I said industrial hegemon always wins out against financial hegemon. Like, we have a lot going for us, and we're putting some of that at risk with increasing the deficit so much and not going after these the new economy, robotics, drones, advanced energy. Those are the things, AI, that we need to win on. And if we don't, I think there's a lot of risk. And
That's a really happy note. I love this. We're just happy upon happy. Okay, cool. I think if folks don't mind sticking around, we'll take our last 3 hands up and then we'll close the dialogue.
This question's for Neil.
Please make it hard.
It might be hard. Since there's such a strong economic, global security and competitiveness and jobs argument for cleaner energy, you've been making this argument, you said, but why is that argument not resonating with Republicans in general?
Yeah, look, I've been frustrated, but to date, there's no question that sort of the ethos of the incoming administration, and it's been supported by Republicans in Congress and quite frankly at the state level and the base as well, they just want to undo anything that the Biden administration, or quite frankly the Obama administration before it, did. And so because the Biden administration made such a heavy emphasis on kind of climate action and climate mitigation, and they prioritize climate, the knee-jerk impulse at this point is to do the exact opposite of what the Biden administration did. And I do think, and I don't think I'm being naive about this, I think this coming surge in demand, which extends beyond AI and deals with streaming services and cloud computing and quantum computing and crypto and Bitcoin mining that the administration cares deeply about, and a reshoring of manufacturing and semiconductor manufacturing. All of these things are incredibly energy intensive at a moment in time where our bills were already going up and are going to continue to go up. And so I think it is going to take that kind of recognition to kind of shift the dynamic. But I do think that shift is coming. Now, I, for one, as a former reliability regulator, I would have thought that some of these grid events that we've experienced, we came pretty close in the mid-Atlantic a couple of weeks ago during a hot weather event to having the rolling blackouts and brownouts. We managed to get through it. Demand response was critical to meeting the peaks to get us through that. I hope these kinds of things will start to break through with Republicans. Unfortunately, as I stated earlier, I don't think it's going to be a grid event that causes us to come out of our partisan corners on energy, because we've had them. We had Uri in Texas. We had significant outages and wildfires in California. We've had issues in PJM in the Mid-Atlantic, and yet people are still kind of locked into their partisan views. I sadly think, as I stated earlier, it's when that first big AI-driven data center goes to South Korea or Japan or China or Alberta, that is going to be what kind of shakes both parties out of this. But right now, I'm actually a little bit shocked that it's 6 months in and we're still drill, baby, drill. I would have thought by now that as you get more people confirmed and seated in the government into the key policy-making positions, deputy secretaries, assistant secretaries, that there would have been a greater recognition that we truly do need to focus on not just maintaining but expanding our deployment of clean technology. I would have thought it would have happened by now, slower than I want it to, but I genuinely believe it's coming.
And I mentioned how nuclear power has had this turnaround in its public perception, while not the small modular nuclear reactors are still years away, and there's been other plants that have come online that have been overrunning cost. It's a great technology, and yet they've had some setbacks that the public perception has overcome. And so I do wonder, how did they do it, right? I don't know yet. It needs to be like a case study, but other clean technologies might need to learn from that, of how did they position themselves? Was it partnering with hyperscalers? Was it positioning themselves as the future? There's something to be figured out there as to how they were able to turn around that branding so remarkably in the past decade. I think we had 2 more. Yes, 1, 2, and thanks so much.
Hi, Julia. You actually started answering my question. So I wanted to ask about nuclear. You guys have been talking a lot about the comparison between the technologies in China and the US and how China is producing X amount more. I wanted to ask, where does nuclear stand versus, when you look at China, the U.S., in Europe, specifically France that has so much in nuclear right now, and in the future, what is the role, what fraction of this, the shortage that you guys are talking about, how much of that can be looked at from the nuclear pie to see how the U.S. can cover all the energy needs?
It could be huge. It could be huge. I am not a nuclear energy expert, but my understanding is that on small nuclear reactors, like it's actually like a pretty tight race right now with us and China and a few others. And then there's like the big prize out there, which is fusion. And that could change everything. So I'm always hesitant. I think we end up spending too much time trying to predict and then guide our policies around our predictions in terms of specific technologies. Like I'm always much more interested in like systematic policies, getting the incentives right for all different sorts of clean energy technologies. But as we sit here today with imperfect information, to me, it seems like nuclear is quite promising from a climate standpoint. It seems like nuclear is quite promising from a U.S. competitive standpoint.
If we can figure out permitting and actually getting them deployed faster and not make small modular reactors go through the same onerous process as large plants, and then you end up with nothing being faster at all. So that'll be the test, is whether we can get out of our own way on the red tape front.
I think the challenge is beyond that. I think it's economic. I think nuclear, it's expensive, and it's just difficult to compete. And I think we need a shift in market dynamics. And I'll say it. Greg didn't say it. I'll be the one to say it. I think a price on carbon completely changes the economics around nuclear, and nuclear becomes overnight an economic boon rather than currently it's a balance sheet liability because it's very expensive.
Wow, can you still be a Republican and say that?
I got fired for saying
yeah,
it.
that's
Our final question.
It's funny you said, in your question, nuclear, and as you said it, my co-founder of Boundary Stone literally walked in the doors, like you manifested it. He leads on nuclear energy. He's a great policy thinker. He's sitting right behind you. You should talk to him about it. But at Overture, we've made some great investments on some advanced nuclear companies. One of them is Blue Energy, and they're solving the balance of plant issue. The reason it's so expensive is not the reactor. It's like all the construction and stuff around it. And so they're doing something really innovative where they use they do it in a shipyard, and they use offshore drilling technology to make the actual construction of the reactor much cheaper, like 10x cheaper, and faster. So pretty cool stuff happening out there.
Love it. And our final question, thanks.
So we heard a lot about winning and losing, and Greg, you mentioned you want to build sort of American equity. I think the big elephant in the room for me is for who, right? And it's been something we've missed in every one of these sessions, is talking about who gets access to that wealth, who benefits from American growth. Let's say we invest more in the American steel industry, but also, certain communities have their cancer risk ratcheted up exponentially over generations because of environmental pollution related to investing more in heavy industry. So the question for me is, how do we, on a bipartisan basis, make sure that both from a health standpoint, from a wealth standpoint, increasing American competitiveness, going for decarbonization, all of that gets distributed equitably across America and not just localized to people who can afford to invest in the energy transition, for example?
I'm really curious what these guys are going to say. I'm on the board of the Solutions Project, and we started off as an organization about 100% renewable energy, and then transformed into an organization that was 100% for the 100%, right? So we were thinking a lot about what you're asking about, and I was very much against when Democrats were in this word police phase, but we've now transitioned from that to we can't say environmental justice, or we can't say diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think those are good values. I don't understand why that's now it's become so politicized, or ESG. Republicans are so good at demonizing and politicizing these concepts. And so I think it's a great question, and I don't know where we go from here right now, because we're in a space now where it's just raising those issues. Some people are afraid to. I mean, people are getting fired over this stuff in the U.S. government. Like, it's pretty scary stuff. So I'm curious what these R's are going to say.
To add one thought that we were talking about the coal industry, like, how is it having this comeback? How does it maintain its strong cultural grab? And they support the Little League teams. They've been entrenched in these communities for so long, many of which those communities have suffered from the technology. So it is a bit of a interesting head scratcher of, like, making sure that communities are actually treated fairly, and that the communities themselves are empowered to stand up for themselves before it's too late, because now you have miners coming out about black lung, being left behind by the companies they worked for, and yet it still holds this, like, mind share on American politics anyway. So it's a complex picture of making sure those communities themselves stand up for themselves, and if they're being a destination, that they get their voice heard. And I do feel like there's movements on the right to make sure that the NIMBYism movement is also on the right as well as the left these days. But I don't know if anyone has more thoughts on how you make sure that the fairness is there.
I mean, there's no question about it. NIMBYism is not political. It's not ideological. Americans don't want energy infrastructure coming through their backyards, whether it's a pipeline to deliver natural gas or a transmission line to deliver clean energy. And there are difficult questions here. On the one side, Julia mentioned coal communities. Look, the reason people in Kentucky cling to coal isn't because we're Neanderthals. It's because it's been the thing that's undergirded our economy for a century. And when the mines close down and the plants that they feed shutter, oftentimes there's not a Burger King or a Walmart for 30 miles that people can seek alternative forms of employment. So their only choices are to move or to go on government assistance. And oftentimes the only asset that these families have in these communities is their homes, because they're multi-generational, because their parents and grandparents worked in the mines, and their homes lose all value because nobody wants to move to an area without any hope for economic prosperity. So to me, the solution is, in those communities, let's find ways to build the clean energy jobs of the future in those communities. The same forklift that moves coal can move component parts for batteries, and I think that needs to be a focus of economic development. Similarly, in other communities, to your point, we've got to do a better job of making the case that, okay, if we do permitting reform, and I understand NIMBYism, and we've got to build a transmission line through your community, and you've already had a railroad come through there, and you've already had a highway come through there, I'm sorry, we're going to build a transmission line using the existing right-of-way because it's the easiest way that we can get this infrastructure built. But in this instance, it's going to enable the retirement of a higher polluting source of generation. We're going to replace it with cleaner energy, and that will actually improve the quality of your air and your water and your health in that community. We got to do a better job of telling that story instead of getting into a broader fight about NIMBYism. And so your question is a very, very relevant one. The thing about energy is it impacts all of us. It's the one thing that touches every single American. Our interests are intertwined, and we've just got to get the politics out of it and kind of focus on outcomes, and I think we can get there.
But that's a great ongoing dialogue for the rest of the day. I think that's a good coming back down to earth way to end this whole segment. Thank you all for sticking around. Bear with me as I do my little closeout here for the show. We're coming up on our time for today. Thank you all so much for participating. Thank you to my co-hosts, Brandon and Neil, for a great show. As always, Greg, thank you for joining us and sharing some of your insights. Really appreciate that. For everyone listening at home, thank you, of course, for tuning in as always. This audience has been amazing. One more little cheer for the feed. Awesome. Thank you, thank you.
Can we announce your news?
Please subscribe to the show if you haven't already. You can catch all of our political climate episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and beyond. We're on X at @poly_climate and on LinkedIn at Political Climate. The show will be taking a little August recess of our own, but we hope that you'll follow along and look for fresh episodes, and of course check out our back catalog. We have recent great interviews, including with Awesome Hawk of PJM on the power grid supply and demand challenges. I'm Julia Pyper. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. What's my news?
The news you shared with me earlier today.
Oh, we have a new climate warrior joining later this year. Yay! All right, thanks so much, everyone.